Bhangarh Fort, India's cursed fortress. The sun had already begun its slow descent behind the rugged Aravalli hills when Arjun, a young trader from Udaipur, first laid eyes on Bhangarh Fort. He had heard whispers of the place from wandering merchants, stories told in hushed tones over flickering oil lamps, tales of curses, spirits, and a town abandoned overnight, leaving behind homes, temples, and markets frozen in time. Yet, like most who sought profit or adventure, Arjun was skeptical. How could a fortress, built by kings and fortified by stone, be cursed simply because the legends said so? But even as he approached the crumbling walls, a chill began to creep over him, not from the winter air, but from the strange, expectant silence that hung over the fort. Bhangarh was not merely abandoned, it was trapped in time. As Arjun passed through the main gate, he noticed that the stone pathways were intact, but wild weeds had begun to reclaim them. Shops and homes had fallen into disrepair, yet within their shadows, the faintest outlines of previous life lingered. Pots still stacked on counters, wooden doors half open as if the occupants had simply vanished. Some of the walls bore remnants of faded murals depicting kings, battles, and festivals, but the paint had darkened into a somber palette, the colors almost as if mourning the people who once lived there. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of dust, damp stone, and something else, something indescribable that seemed to cling to his senses, a presence that was more felt than seen. As Arjun wandered deeper into the fort, he recalled one of the local tales, whispered often in markets far from this place. It was said that the fort's builder, Raja Madho Singh, had been obsessed with both power and beauty. To ensure his legacy endured, he had summoned astrologers, priests, and even sorcerers to bless his fortifications. Among these, one name persisted in local folklore: a tantric named Singhiya, a practitioner of dark arts who had demanded the princess of the fort, Ratnavati, as his price for a powerful charm that would protect Bhangarh from invaders. The Raja, in a rare act of defiance, refused the tantric's request. Singhiya, humiliated and enraged, is said to have cursed the fort. Anyone who dared enter after sunset would be met with doom, and the once thriving town would wither under his dark spell. Despite the tale, the sun was still above the horizon, and Arjun's curiosity outweighed any sense of dread. He made his way to what had once been the central market square. Here, he could see the foundations of shops, the arches that had once framed bustling trade, and remnants of statues that adorned fountains long dried. As the shadows grew longer, he noticed something peculiar: a series of footprints in the dust, faint but clearly recent. They were human, yet the pattern was erratic, as though someone, or something, had moved hurriedly and then paused. Arjun's heart thumped, but he reasoned it could be other travelers or animals. Still, the feeling of being watched intensified, prickling at the back of his neck. He continued toward the inner sanctum of the fort, the palace that once housed Raja Madho Singh and Princess Ratnavati. The architecture was both imposing and intricate, with sandstone walls carved into elaborate patterns. Yet even in the waning light, the decay was undeniable. Stones had loosened, some structures partially collapsed, and the once grand doors hung crooked on their hinges. As he explored, Arjun's lantern flickered, casting long, jittery shadows across the walls. And in one of those shadows, he swore he saw a figure, tall, thin, cloaked in faint mist, standing silently at the end of a hallway. He blinked, but it was gone. Only the echo of a soft whisper remained, so faint he questioned whether he had imagined it. Arjun's thoughts turned to the princess, Ratnavati, whose legend had outlived the fort itself. She was said to be extraordinarily beautiful, and her grace and intelligence were admired across kingdoms. Yet she had also been a tragic figure, doomed to be at the center of the Tantric's wrath. The curse, it was said, was linked directly to her spirit. Locals told stories of travelers hearing soft singing or laughter at night, voices that seemed childlike yet otherworldly, drifting across the ruins. Some claimed to see a woman in a red veil, wandering the ramparts, her face obscured by shadows, appearing and disappearing with the wind. Was it the princess herself, bound to the mortal plane by Singhiya's curse? Arjun could not know, but he felt that each step he took deeper into the fort brought him closer to the answers, or to the danger itself. He entered the main temple within the fort, dedicated to Hanuman, the guardian deity. The temple's stone pillars, once polished and etched with devotion, were now marred by moss and cracks. Offerings had decayed into dust, and the bell above the entrance was missing. As he walked carefully through the temple, a sudden gust of wind blew through the corridors, extinguishing his lantern and plunging him into darkness. Panic prickled at his skin. The air seemed charged, almost electric, and he could hear the faintest scuff of movement from the shadows. He called out, though his voice sounded hollow, absorbed by the walls. No answer came, only the sensation that he was not alone. Arjun tried to steady his breathing. He lit his lantern again, and the dim light revealed an unusual sight. A stone slab on the floor, carved with symbols he did not recognize. They were intricate, swirling designs, some resembling flames, others serpentine forms. As he leaned closer, he felt a sudden pressure, a heaviness that made his arms ache. It was as though the air itself carried a warning. Some forces here were not of the living world. Stories of the Tantric's curse rushed back to him. Had Singhia's dark magic endured centuries, tying the spirits of Bhangarh to the stones themselves? And if so, was it merely a legend, or something far more tangible and terrifying? The shadows lengthened, and the first chill of night settled over the fort. The distant hills swallowed the sun completely, leaving only the dim glow of Arjun's lantern. He felt an almost magnetic pull toward the eastern ramparts, a place locals called the Princess's Watch, where Ratnavati was said to have gazed over her kingdom one last time before tragedy struck. As he climbed the worn stairs, the air grew colder, and he felt goosebumps rise along his arms. The wind carried a whisper, almost lyrical, calling his name softly, urging him to step closer to the edge of the fortifications. There, standing above the valley below, Arjun felt it, the presence of something beyond the physical. A figure appeared, almost translucent, in a scarlet veil that shimmered with the last light of dusk. Her eyes, when they met his, seemed to pierce through the veil of time, holding both sorrow and warning. He could not speak, nor move, frozen in awe and terror. The wind tugged at the veil, revealing a glimpse of her delicate features intertwined with an ethereal distortion, like smoke forming a human face. It was the Grey Lady of Bhangarh, the spirit of Ratnavati herself, bound to this place by ancient magic and mortal betrayal. The moment felt eternal. Then, with a sudden gust, the apparition dissipated, leaving Arjun alone on the rampart, the darkness pressing in from all sides. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. The whispering wind seemed to carry a single coherent message. Leave before the night fully falls, or you will remain. He stepped back, feeling the tangible weight of centuries of unresolved history pressing against him. And yet, even as fear surged, a part of him, the part that sought understanding, truth, and stories untold, knew he could not simply walk away. The fort had opened a door into its haunted past, and Arjun was now a witness. That night, as he made camp outside the outer walls, he could not stop thinking about the curse, the princess, and the Tantric's wrath. The fort's silhouette against the moon seemed alive, almost breathing. And in the stillness, he heard it again. A faint, lilting song, rising from within the stones themselves. Was it a warning, an invitation, or the eternal lament of a spirit trapped by centuries of fear and magic? Arjun could not know, but he felt certain of one thing. The stories of Bhangarh Fort were far from over, and the night was only just beginning. The night settled over Bhangarh Fort like a heavy velvet curtain, thick with silence yet buzzing with unseen energy. Outside, the wind rustled through the crags of the Aravalli Hills, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and the faint metallic tang of the fort's ancient stones. Arjun could feel the weight of the night pressing on him, a subtle but persistent pressure that suggested he had crossed a threshold into a space where time itself seemed suspended. The fort, abandoned by the living, was not empty. It was alive with the echoes of the past, footsteps that no one had taken, whispers of voices long silenced, and the delicate traces of movements preserved in stone and shadow. Determined to uncover more, Arjun decided to venture deeper into the inner chambers of the fort, those sections less visited even by the curious and the brave. The narrow pathways twisted like veins, guiding him past collapsed walls, empty wells, and remnants of homes where generations had once lived. Each doorway he passed revealed fragments of life frozen mid-motion, overturned earthen pots, a child's small sandal in the corner of a room, the faint outline of murals depicting rituals and ceremonies that time had almost erased. The combination of decay and preservation gave the fort a dreamlike, almost unreal quality. Here, history was tangible, yet it was also haunted, its energy lingering in the air, waiting to be acknowledged. Arjun paused near what had once been the main residential quarters of the royal family. The sandstone walls were intricately carved with floral motifs and geometric patterns, worn smooth by centuries but still legible in the flickering lantern light. He traced the carvings with a cautious hand, noting that some symbols were unfamiliar, likely remnants of the tantric practices long whispered about in local folklore. These markings were not mere decoration. They seemed to hum with a latent energy, subtle enough to escape the unobservant but potent enough to be felt by one attuned to the unseen. A low, almost imperceptible vibration ran through the floor beneath his feet, and Arjun realized that these were not mere stories or legends. The fort itself seemed aware of his presence. He moved to the central courtyard, where open space allowed the moonlight to spill over broken fountains and overgrown gardens. The air here was cooler, carrying with it the faint sound of water dripping from a shattered reservoir. Arjun thought he saw movement in the corner of his eye, a figure gliding silently along the edge of the courtyard. He turned quickly, lantern raised, but saw nothing. The chill in the air intensified, wrapping around him like invisible hands, tugging at his sleeve. He remembered the warning whispered by the spirit on the ramparts, "Leave before the night fully falls." Yet some inexplicable pull compelled him onward, deeper into the fort's labyrinthine heart. As he approached the temple complex within the fort, the atmosphere grew heavier still. This section, dedicated to various deities, had fallen into particular disrepair. Fallen statues, broken pillars, and decayed altars created a landscape of ruin, each object carrying with it the residual energy of devotion, sorrow, and abandonment. Arjun noticed the faint glow of moonlight reflecting off certain carvings in a way that suggested the presence of something more than stone. And then he heard it, a soft, mournful chant, rising and falling like the wind itself, but distinctly human in cadence. It was a song that seemed to have no origin, yet it filled the temple with haunting resonance. He could not see anyone, yet the sound was undeniable. Curiosity warred with fear. Arjun advanced cautiously, noting that the chanting seemed to come from the inner sanctum, a small chamber that had been sealed for centuries. The door was slightly ajar, as if inviting him in. Pushing it open revealed a chamber illuminated only by moonlight streaming through cracks in the roof. At the center stood a statue of Hanuman, its features worn but still commanding reverence. Around it, symbols etched into the stone floor glimmered faintly, glowing like embers in the shadows. Arjun's breath caught. These markings were identical to those he had seen in the residential quarters, yet here they formed an intricate pattern, suggesting ritualistic significance. He felt an invisible pressure urging him to step closer, to decipher their meaning, but a prickle of apprehension warned him against rash action. It was then that he saw her, the spirit of Ratnavati, the princess of legend. Her form emerged from the shadows, scarlet veil fluttering despite the absence of wind, half-face radiant and human, half-face ghostly and terrifying, eyes gleaming with sorrow and warning. She did not move toward him, yet her presence filled the chamber, her gaze locking onto his. A soft whisper rose above the faint chant. "The curse binds all who dwell within. Do you wish to see what remains?" Though his heart pounded, Arjun nodded, compelled by an irresistible desire to understand the truth behind centuries of myth and legend. The princess led, or perhaps guided him through the temple, stopping at each carving and symbol, conveying their stories without words. He understood that these were not merely decorations but records of events, Rituals performed to protect the fort, sacrifices made in times of siege, and warnings left by those who had tried to manipulate the spiritual forces of Bhangarh. Some of these rituals had succeeded in warding off invaders, while others had unleashed energies that remained trapped, restless, and unseen. He felt a shiver travel down his spine. The stories embedded in the stone were vivid, almost living, and he realized the fort's reputation for hauntings was no exaggeration. Suddenly, a distant sound broke his concentration, a sharp crack followed by the echo of falling stones. Arjun turned to see shadows twisting unnaturally along the temple walls. Figures materialized, translucent soldiers, merchants, and servants of long-past generations, each frozen in actions that conveyed fear, sorrow, or frantic movement. The princess's ghost seemed to calm them, and they moved with her guidance, forming a procession that Arjun could not fully comprehend. It was a vision of the past, yet it was hauntingly present, an intersection of centuries compressed into a single, breathless moment. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes, for time felt suspended. The chanting in the ghostly procession faded with the first light of dawn, leaving only the echoes of memory and stone. Arjun stepped outside the temple, heart racing, understanding that he had been granted a glimpse into forces beyond mortal comprehension. Bhangarh Fort was more than a ruined stronghold. It was a repository of human ambition, devotion, sorrow, and vengeance, preserved through a combination of stone, ritual, and the lingering presence of those bound to it. As the sun crested the hills, illuminating the fort in soft golden light, Arjun realized that the curse, while terrifying, was also a story of resilience. The spirits were not malevolent without cause. They were guardians, chroniclers, and reminders of a past that demanded attention. The princess's warning lingered in his mind. Those who enter must respect what remains, or join what cannot leave. He descended the stairs from the temple, aware that his journey had just begun. There were more stories to uncover, more spirits to meet, and more truths to record. The fort seemed different now in daylight. Shadows no longer shifted unnaturally, and the air was lighter, yet Arjun felt the subtle tension beneath the surface. Bhangarh had revealed fragments of its past, yet many mysteries remained. Who had survived the Tantric's wrath? Which rituals had succeeded? And what lay hidden in the underground chambers that few dared enter? Each unanswered question pulled him forward, promising more revelations and more encounters with the spectral remnants of this cursed fortress. Even as he rested that morning, Arjun knew the fort's story would not release him so easily. Its walls held secrets too potent to remain dormant, and its spirits too restless to be ignored. And somewhere deep within the stones, Ratnavati's presence lingered, a beautiful yet haunting reminder of the price of defiance, the endurance of curses, and the eternal dialogue between the living and the dead. Night fell again over Bhangarh Fort, heavier this time, as if the darkness itself were aware of Arjun's presence. The daytime revealed fragments of life and history, but night unveiled the fort's true nature, the space where past and present intertwined, where stone and spirit coexisted, and where the curse, centuries old, thrived. Shadows lengthened unnaturally across the courtyards, following him even as he walked in the lantern's narrow circle of light. The air was dense, carrying whispers that seemed to originate from nowhere and everywhere at once. Arjun's pulse quickened. He knew he had crossed the threshold into the heart of the fort's mysteries, a place few dared to enter once the sun had set. He moved carefully along the main thoroughfare, the remnants of merchant stalls and residential structures looming like silent sentinels. Faded murals depicted battles, religious ceremonies, and royal processions. But in the dim light, the figures seemed to twist, almost breathing, their painted eyes glinting with accusation or plea. Arjun noticed that footprints he had seen yesterday were now joined by others, smaller, lighter, some dragging slightly as if the occupants had been pulled by unseen hands. He could hear soft murmurs, incoherent but tinged with urgency, urging him deeper into the fort. Drawn toward the palace, he found the entrance to the underground chambers, a place few spoke of even in whispers. The doorway was partially hidden behind rubble, yet the air emanating from it was colder, almost viscous, pressing against his skin. Legend spoke of this chamber as the domain of Singya's most potent curses, a labyrinth of tunnels where rituals had been performed and sacrifices offered. The fort's stone walls were etched with sigils, some smudged by time, others clear and unnervingly vibrant. Arjun's lantern flickered violently as he stepped inside, revealing the cavernous space beneath the palace, empty yet alive with anticipation. The underground chamber was larger than he expected, an expansive hall lined with pillars carved in the likeness of serpents and celestial patterns. In the faint light, he could make out small depressions in the floor, as though bodies had once lain here, now long removed or vanished. The air was thick with the scent of earth, dust, and something more, a metallic tang that reminded him of blood, though no blood remained. Whispered chants swirled around him, sometimes rising in intensity, sometimes fading into almost silence. Arjun felt his legs grow heavy as though the fort itself resisted his intrusion. It was then that he saw her, the spirit of Ratnavati, more vivid than ever. Her form emerged from the shadows, the scarlet veil flowing like liquid fire in the dim lantern glow. Half her face remained as delicate and beautiful as legends described, while the other half bore the marks of a ghostly distortion, eyes luminous and haunting. She extended a hand toward him, not threatening but beckoning, guiding him to a central platform where carvings detailed the Tantric S curse and the rituals performed to contain it. The symbols pulsed faintly with a light of their own, almost alive, and Arjun could feel the weight of centuries pressing into his chest. The princess's voice echoed, clearer now, whispering fragments of history he could almost understand. The curse was not merely a legend. It had been enacted, crafted with intent and power. Those who defied the rituals, who entered the fort unprepared, were doomed to witness the fort's memories firsthand, caught in a loop of its haunted past. Arjun realized with chilling clarity that the fort's inhabitants, merchants, soldiers, priests, and princesses had been caught in this cycle, and their echoes were preserved in the very stones he walked upon. As he examined the carvings, shadows began to coalesce into forms, recreating moments of past tragedy. A young servant stumbling down a corridor, a priest performing rites under duress, a soldier frozen in fear. Each scene played like a ghostly tableau, detailed and precise, yet intangible. Ratnavati moved among them, her presence binding the fragments together, mediating the restless spirits who had been trapped for centuries. Arjun's mind struggled to process what he saw. It was both history and horror, factual yet spectral, and entirely immersive. The air grew colder still, and a sudden gust extinguished his lantern, leaving him in near total darkness. His breathing quickened as the chanting and whispers intensified, surrounding him, pressing into his mind. Then, as abruptly as it had started, the sound ceased, replaced by silence that was deeper than anything he had experienced. From the darkness emerged a soft light, glowing eyes of countless spirits reflecting the moonlight seeping through cracks above. They observed him silently, and for a moment he felt the collective gaze of centuries. Ratnavati approached him once more, placing a transparent hand on his shoulder. The touch was both cold and oddly grounding. She conveyed a silent message. Respect and caution were essential, for the fort's legacy was fragile, balanced precariously between the living and the dead. Any intrusion without understanding would awaken the latent forces, potentially trapping the interloper in a loop of spectral history. Arjun nodded, though his voice caught in his throat. The princess's gaze lingered, sorrowful yet resigned, a reminder that some lessons were learned only through observation and experience. He retraced his steps toward the main courtyard, where the first light of dawn had begun to breach the horizon. The spectral tableau faded as shadows retreated into the underground, and the walls seemed to exhale, releasing some of the tension that had thickened the night air. Yet the weight of the experience lingered. He could still sense the fort's vigilance, a subtle hum beneath the stone that suggested the presence of the unseen. Bhangarh Fort was not merely haunted, it was a living archive of fear, devotion, and vengeance, and each stone carried the memory of those bound to it. Emerging into daylight, Arjun felt the stark contrast between night and day. past and present. The fort appeared quiet, serene even, but he knew better. He had glimpsed the hidden pulse beneath its surface, the spectral echoes of a civilization caught between history and haunting. The princess's warnings echoed in his mind. Respect what remains, or remain what is respected. He understood the gravity of the curse, not as a myth, but as a living, breathing force that would endure as long as the fort itself stood. Arjun left Bhangarh with more than stories. He carried the weight of the fort's secrets, the images of spectral processions, the whispers of rituals, and the ever-present gaze of Ratnavati. He realized that some places, though abandoned, are never truly empty. They are repositories of memory, emotion, and unresolved energy. The curse of Bhangarh Fort was not malevolent without cause. It was a sentinel, preserving history in a form both terrifying and instructive. And for those who dared enter, it offered a choice: respect the past or become part of it. As he walked away, the fort faded into the distance, its silhouette still imposing against the hills. Yet even from afar, the red-tinged moonlight reflected off the ramparts, casting long shadows that seemed to move independently of the wind. Arjun knew he would return, compelled by the unresolved mysteries and the spectral presence that lingered even in daylight. For Bhangarh Fort had shared its secrets, but it had also left questions unanswered, ensuring that the haunted legacy of India's cursed fortress would continue to captivate and terrify all who dared to listen. Story 2. The Tantric's Curse. Long before the stones of Bhangarh Fort bore the weight of centuries, before the princess's veil fluttered like a scarlet warning in the wind, there was Singya, the Tantric whose shadow would stretch across history. He was a man of remarkable skill, both feared and revered, known for weaving magic with precision, blending the spiritual with the physical in ways that left common folk trembling. Even the most powerful rulers consulted him, for his knowledge of curses and charms was unmatched, and his reputation had traveled across kingdoms. But Singya was also a man of pride, a scholar of esoteric texts, and one who considered insult or rejection an offense that demanded attention. Singya arrived in the court of Raja Madho Singh with a proposal. He claimed to possess a ritual of protection, one that would shield the fort from invaders and calamities, rendering it nearly impregnable. The Raja, ambitious and cautious, listened carefully. The Tantric's instructions were precise, a combination of rare herbs, incantations, and a binding ritual. But Singya's request contained a condition that was impossible to fulfill. He demanded the princess herself as a participant, or at least as a symbolic offering, claiming that her beauty and energy would anchor the protective spell. Raja Madho Singh, though respectful of the Tantric's powers, found this request intolerable. The princess, Ratnavati, was his pride, his heir, and he could not compromise her dignity or safety. He refused, and in that moment the seeds of a curse were sown. Singya's pride, wounded and inflamed, transformed into malice. He whispered words that carried weight beyond the walls of the fort, performing incantations in secret chambers and forests beyond the palace grounds. His rituals were designed not only to protect the fort, but to mark it with a curse that would endure across time, a dark signature that could not be erased by generations. The initial days were subtle. Traders reported strange occurrences. Livestock refused to enter certain gates. The waters in the wells turned brackish without explanation, and shadows moved oddly in the corners of the market square. Servants spoke of whispers that seemed to come from empty rooms, faint yet persistent. These phenomena were easy to dismiss, but Singya's magic was working in ways beyond the comprehension of ordinary people. It was a curse woven into the very fabric of the fort, invisible yet undeniable, influencing the energy of the stones, the air, and the living souls who walked its halls. Singya's magic relied on three essential elements: intent, energy, and sacrifice. He had the intent driven by wounded pride. He had energy drawn from his mastery of the Tantric arts, and for the sacrifice he had cunningly used symbolic representations of human life, carefully creating altars and relics that allowed the curse to persist without requiring a physical offering. The result was subtle but powerful. The fort became a magnet for unrest, where ordinary fears escalated into spectral phenomena and history became a palimpsest of unease and lingering sorrow. The princess, unaware at first, began to notice signs as well. She would glimpse fleeting shadows in her chambers, hear soft footsteps echoing along empty corridors, and feel the weight of eyes upon her even in solitude. These were not illusions, but early manifestations of the Tantric spell, binding her essence to the fort as a silent observer, ensuring that her spirit would one day serve as a witness to the unfolding consequences. The Raja consulted scholars, priests, and astrologers, seeking remedies, but Singhia's work was intricate, layered, and resilient, designed to withstand ordinary countermeasures. As months passed, the fort's reputation shifted. Travelers, who once viewed Bhangarh as a thriving hub, began to whisper of unease. Strange lights were seen along the ramparts at night, and animals often fled from the fort in panic. Villagers in nearby settlements reported hearing screams that were both human and not, echoing across the hills, leaving an impression that the fort itself was alive and restless. These were the tangible manifestations of Singhia's curse taking shape, subtle enough to intrigue, yet frightening enough to caution. Arjun, centuries later, would encounter these very echoes, though he did not know their origin. The Tantric's curse was not simply malevolent, it was an enduring mark, a kind of spiritual architecture that layered itself over the physical fort. Each stone, each hallway, each corridor carried a residue of his intentions. Visitors were affected not just by stories, but by the energy that had been embedded in the fort's structure, a resonance that guided their fears and perceptions. In this way, Singhia's magic was a masterstroke. It transformed a physical location into a repository of memory, fear, and caution, ensuring that the fort's haunted nature would endure. Singhia's pride, however, was not the only force at work. The Raja and his advisors sought to mitigate the curse, performing protective rituals and attempting to counteract the Tantric's influence. These efforts were partially successful, containing some of the curse's energy, redirecting it and transforming it into phenomena that were less destructive and more spectral, creating the ghosts and whispers that would become legend. Yet the core of the curse, the binding of Ratnavati's essence, the subtle distortion of time and perception within the fort, remained intact. Singhia had woven a spell beyond the comprehension of mortals, ensuring that the fort itself would carry the echoes of his wrath for centuries. By the time Arjun approached Bhangarh, centuries had passed since Singhia's ritual. The fort had fallen into ruin, yet its supernatural architecture persisted. Shadows moved oddly not because of wind or trickery, but because the curse shaped the perception of those who entered. Whispered voices were not echoes of imagination, but the residual energy of the Tantric's design interacting with the human mind. The fort became both history and haunted experience, a place where living curiosity intersected with spiritual endurance. Even today, those who dare enter Bhangarh after sunset report a subtle but unmistakable presence, a guidance and a warning, a call to respect the site's past. The Tantric's curse is both a trap and a story, a legacy of human emotion, pride, defiance, and ingenuity, that shaped a fortress not only in stone but in spirit. And so the fort remains, a testament to one man's skill, one ruler's defiance, and the enduring presence of a curse that continues to guide, terrify, and enthrall all who step within its walls. Night descended upon Bhangarh Fort with a weight that was almost tangible, settling over the sandstone walls and empty courtyards like a suffocating blanket. The wind carried a hint of damp earth and the faint metallic tang of iron, as though the fort itself exhaled centuries of hidden memory. Arjun, torch in hand, stepped cautiously into the inner precincts where Singhia had performed his most potent rituals. Though time had eroded the physical markers of his work, the energy remained palpable, a subtle hum in the stones that vibrated against his feet. The inner sanctum where Singhia had executed his grandest spell was deceptively modest. A small chamber lined with etchings and symbols, many now blurred by age, yet the air was charged with intent. Arjun could feel the deliberate weight of centuries pressing down upon him, the meticulous arrangement of incantations that bound energy to the fort itself. Candles long extinguished seemed to have left residual warmth, a lingering signature of the Tantric's manipulation. Every carved line, every symbol, was a conduit, a channel for forces beyond mortal understanding, ensuring that the fort would retain its spectral resonance indefinitely. Singhia's rituals relied on precise timing and the interaction of multiple elements: earth, fire, water, and the subtle energies of human consciousness. He had chosen the fort's location deliberately. The convergence of ley lines, the natural isolation, and the elevation above the surrounding terrain created a spiritual amplifier. The Tantric believed that by harnessing these factors, he could magnify both the protective and punitive aspects of his work. His focus was unwavering, and his pride in his own mastery drove him to push beyond the boundaries of traditional Tantric practices. Arjun could almost see the echo of Singhia's presence, a spectral outline that lingered in the chamber, as though the fort itself preserved the memory of a man consumed by his own ambition. Outside, the courtyard was beginning to take on the unnatural characteristics that would become legend. Shadows moved independently of the light, stretching and curling as though alive. Arjun paused, noting a faint figure near the northern ramparts. It was the residual energy of a guard, trapped in time, replaying his final moments in a loop the Tantric magic had encoded into the Fort's structure. The air grew colder as he approached, carrying a faint murmur of panic, the fear that had once been so acute that it left an imprint on the environment itself. Arjun realized that Bhangarh was not haunted randomly. The fort's spectral inhabitants were shaped and constrained by Singhia's deliberate magic. Within the residential quarters, the energy was more subtle, but no less intense. The spaces once occupied by the royal family carried a layered history, a combination of human emotion and mystical manipulation. Ratnavati's presence could be felt here more strongly, her essence intertwined with the enchantments that Singhia had woven. Arjun noted the faint shimmer along the walls, almost like heat waves, but colder and more precise, traces of a protective binding that could simultaneously nurture and terrify. Every step he took echoed with history, a resonance of life and death that Singhia had foreseen. The most compelling evidence of the curse's depth was found in the temple complex. Here, carvings that once seemed decorative revealed their true function. They were maps, instructions, and records of rituals meant to anchor energy, summon protection, and when necessary, exact vengeance. Arjun traced his fingers along the symbols, sensing the deliberate tension in the carvings. Each line, each groove, had been designed to persist over time, translating centuries of intent into a tangible, almost palpable force. Singhia's magic had not been an act of whimsy. It was engineering of the spiritual realm, designed to survive long after his physical body returned to dust. He moved toward the central altar, where remnants of offerings remained, charred fragments of incense, the faint remains of powders used in ritual purification, and small objects whose purpose was clear only to those who understood Tantric practice. Here, the fort's energy was at its strongest. The air vibrated subtly, carrying the sound of whispers that seemed to emerge from the stones themselves. Arjun could feel a pressure on his mind, a pull toward understanding, but also a warning. The deeper he delved, the more entwined he would become with the fort's persistent echoes. Singhia had bound the past so tightly to the present that those who entered were always interacting with centuries-old energy, caught between history and haunting. Arjun's attention was drawn to the corners of the chamber, where shadows gathered unnaturally. He realized that these were not hallucinations, but residual imprints, the remains of those who had failed to heed Singhia's warnings. Soldiers, servants, and even members of the royal household replayed their final moments, their energy anchored by the Tantric's precise manipulations. It was a hauntingly beautiful display, each figure frozen in motion, yet radiating emotion, fear, and desperation. The fort was alive not only with memory but with intentional preservation, the curse serving as both record and warning. Then the air shifted. A low hum, almost imperceptible at first, became a chant, a repetition of the mantras that Singhia had performed centuries ago. Arjun could feel the vibration in his chest, a subtle tightening in his chest cavity that seemed to synchronize with the rhythm. This was the climax of the Tantric's power, the point at which protective magic and punitive energy converged. The spirits of the fort's former inhabitants appeared more defined, their outlines clearer against the moonlit stone. Ratnavati's ghost hovered at the center, her expression solemn, as though observing Arjun's interaction with the enchanted space. Despite the overwhelming presence of these energies, Arjun pressed onward, moving into a narrow corridor that led deeper into the fort's bowels. Each step was measured, each breath careful, as he became increasingly aware that Singya's curse was not only about protection or vengeance, it was about control, creating a space where the living and the spectral interacted in carefully orchestrated patterns. The fort's history, its tragedies, and its rituals were all encoded into the physical and spiritual architecture, and anyone who entered was now a participant in the ongoing narrative. In one chamber, he discovered an array of symbols etched into the floor in concentric circles. The design radiated outward, almost vibrating in the moonlight. Arjun recognized the symbols from the outer quarters, but now understood their significance. They were amplifiers, designed to focus energy and bind it to the fort's stones. Stepping inside one of the circles caused a subtle reaction. The shadows shifted, whispers rose in intensity, and the air felt thicker. The spirits in the room seemed to acknowledge his intrusion, their forms flickering like candle flames in the wind. Singya had intended for these areas to be thresholds, places where the living could experience the potency of the curse firsthand, but only under the guidance of those who knew how to interpret it. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. The fort's energy ebbed and flowed, guiding Arjun's movements without his conscious understanding. He realized that Singya had crafted a space that could interact with human curiosity, encouraging exploration, but punishing recklessness. The spirits were not malevolent on their own. They were extensions of the curse, acting according to the patterns encoded centuries before. The fort's haunting nature was as much a consequence of human interaction with Singya's design as it was of any supernatural intent. As the night reached its deepest point, Arjun felt a presence behind him. Ratnavati's ghost appeared once more, guiding him toward the exit, as if to remind him that the fort's magic demanded respect. The whispers receded, the shadows withdrew slightly, and the oppressive weight in the air lifted just enough to allow him to breathe freely. He understood now that the fort was a living archive, a structure of memory, energy, and spectral influence, all engineered by Singya's meticulous hand. The Tantric's curse was not just a story. It was a living mechanism, designed to endure, to protect, and to haunt. Emerging into the courtyard as dawn broke, Arjun reflected on the night's events. The curse was more than legend. It was history codified in energy and stone, a testament to Singya's skill, ambition, and pride. He could feel the residual presence of the spirits, and Ratnavati's gaze lingered in his mind, reminding him that some knowledge came at a price. The fort's story was ongoing, a continuum of life and afterlife intertwined, guided by forces that transcended time. Even in daylight, the fort retained its tension. Shadows seemed to shift slightly in the corner of his vision, and the chill of night lingered in certain chambers. Arjun knew that Singya's curse would continue to shape the fort's experience for all who entered. Its power was subtle but persistent, a carefully crafted tapestry of magic, memory, and haunting energy that could never fully fade. And so Bhangarh Fort endured, not merely as stone and ruin, but as a testament to the enduring potency of the Tantric's curse, a presence that would captivate and terrify generations to come. The sun had dipped behind the Aravalli hills, casting the ruins of Bhangarh Fort in long, brooding shadows. The air carried the faint scent of damp earth and smoke from distant fires, mixing with the residue of incense that lingered in the fort's abandoned chambers. Arjun felt the pull of something unseen yet undeniably present, guiding him back toward the heart of the fort. This was the moment the Tantric's curse revealed its full depth, where centuries of ritual, intent, and residual energy converged in a crescendo of spectral resonance. As he stepped into the main courtyard, the temperature dropped sharply. The wind carried whispers, fragmented and layered, voices of soldiers, servants, and royal courtiers who had lived, suffered, and died within these walls. The shadows of the ramparts seemed to stretch unnaturally, reaching toward him like elongated fingers. Arjun realized that the fort's curse was not simply a product of legend. It was an active force, shaping perception, manipulating space, and binding the living to the echoes of the past. Each step he took reverberated with history, amplified by Singhia's meticulous design, ensuring that the past could never be fully separated from the present. He moved toward the underground chambers, the epicenter of the Tantric's most potent rituals. The entrance was partially concealed by debris, yet the air that escaped carried a chill that penetrated to his bones. As he descended, the corridor walls seemed to breathe, exhaling centuries of spiritual energy. The carvings along the walls glowed faintly under the lantern's flicker, pulsating as if alive. Each symbol acted as a conduit, channeling the residual energies of Singhia's curse while interacting with the living presence of Arjun himself. It was as though the fort was testing him, evaluating his intentions, measuring his courage against the weight of history. In the chamber, the carvings became more intricate, depicting sequences of ritual acts, symbolic offerings, and geometric patterns designed to contain, amplify, and direct spiritual energy. Arjun traced the lines with his eyes, feeling the vibrations through his fingertips. Shadows began to coalesce into semi-transparent forms. Soldiers frozen in terror, servants crouched in fear, priests performing rites under duress. The apparitions were not malicious. They were echoes of the past, preserved and structured by Singhia's magic. The fort itself had become a living archive of human experience, with the curse as both guardian and recorder. Ratnavati's spirit appeared again, her half-beautiful, half-warped visage illuminated by the spectral glow of the chamber. Her eyes, luminous and haunted, met Arjun's, and he felt a silent communication pass between them. She conveyed the fort's lesson: respect the past, understand the ritual, and acknowledge the weight of history, or risk becoming another echo trapped within its walls. Her presence was at once protective and sorrowful, a reminder of the cost of defiance, the fragility of human life, and the enduring power of intent. The air grew heavy as the chamber thrummed with energy. The whispering voices intensified, forming a coherent chorus that seemed to narrate the events of the fort's past. Arjun watched as the apparitions enacted the pivotal moments of Singhia's curse, the refusal of the Raja, the tantrum of pride that transformed into deliberate binding, the rituals performed with meticulous precision, and the first signs of the fort's haunting phenomena. The energy spiraled around him, tangible yet invisible, as if the fort itself were alive and aware of his presence. Arjun could sense the curse reaching its apex. The residual energy of Singhia's ritual, stored and amplified by centuries of stone, was converging in a point directly beneath the altar. A soft, low hum reverberated through the chamber, vibrating against the walls, the floor, and his own chest. The spectral figures moved closer together, forming a semicircle, almost like a tribunal observing the living intruder. The interplay of light and shadow created a visual symphony of fear and beauty, of history preserved and terror maintained. In that moment, Arjun understood the complexity of Singhia's design. The curse was layered, protective, punitive, and instructive. It was meant to ensure that anyone who entered would confront the fort's history, not as a distant observer, but as an active participant. Every shadow, every whisper, every apparition was a carefully placed element, designed to educate, terrify, and preserve the memory of human pride and defiance. The Tantric had transformed Bhangarh into a living, breathing entity of memory, a place where time itself bent under the weight of ritual and intention. As the first rays of dawn seeped through cracks in the fort's walls, the apparitions slowly dissipated. The shadows retreated, leaving faint traces of light along the chamber walls. Ratnavati lingered a moment longer, her form shimmering like a mirage, before fading into the residual glow of the altar. Arjun felt the fort's presence ease, a subtle acknowledgement that he had observed, respected, and endured the full expression of Singhia's curse. The whispers faded, replaced by the distant sound of birds and the morning breeze, yet the weight of the night's events remained embedded in his consciousness. Emerging into the daylight, Arjun reflected on the magnitude of what he had witnessed. The Tantric's curse was more than a story. It was a meticulously constructed spiritual ecosystem, a testament to human ingenuity, ambition, and obsession. It had survived centuries, interacted with countless individuals, and yet remained potent, undiminished by the passage of time. The fort itself stood as a monument to the complexity of human intention and the enduring power of the unseen. Even as he walked away, Arjun could feel the fort's watchful presence. Bhangarh's stones had absorbed the energy of every ritual, every whisper, and every act of defiance. The Tantric's curse was not malevolent for the sake of cruelty. It was a structured, deliberate, and persistent force, designed to maintain the sanctity and memory of the place. For centuries it had protected, haunted, and instructed, a continuous link between past and present, living and spectral. Arjun knew he would carry the experience for the rest of his life. The echoes of Bhangarh, Singya's intricate spellwork, and Ratnavati's sorrowful vigilance would remain with him, a reminder that some histories are not merely told. They are experienced, endured, and preserved through the subtle architecture of spirit and intent. The Tantric's curse had succeeded beyond its original design, and the fort, in turn, had become a living testament to the enduring interplay between human ambition, pride, and the mysteries of the unseen. As he left the gates behind, the red-tinged moon dipped beneath the horizon, casting long, wavering shadows across the landscape. The fort receded into the distance, yet its presence lingered, a silent, persistent force waiting for the next curious soul to walk its haunted paths. And thus, Bhangarh Fort remained, a fortress not only of stone, but of memory, ritual, and the inescapable legacy of the Tantric's curse.